Eli Navarro rode into the railroad town of Prescott with the northern Arizona dust caked on his coat and 8 years of bitterness settled in his gut. The place had grown, but the wind was the same, a high, lonely sound that scraped over the red rock cliffs and carried the smell of creosote and coal smoke. He was a man made of hard lines and brown skin, his father's Mexican blood clear in his features and his mother's anger buried deep in his dark eyes. He kept his hand near the worn grip of his revolver, a habit learned over half a lifetime of being watched. He was not here for the work, or the gambling, or the raw whiskey. He was here because of a rumor, a piece of news that had drifted south and found him in a border cantina, a story so bitter and ironic it had pulled him all the way back. Josephine Beecham, the woman who had cut him loose like a lame horse, was now a widow, respectable and wealthy, and more than that. She ran the Beecham Home for Wayward Women, a brick building on the respectable side of the tracks, a monument to her charity. Eli spat the dust from his mouth. Charity. He remembered Josephine's particular kind of charity. It was the kind that promised everything in the dark and delivered a cold shoulder in the light. She had left him for a banker with soft hands and a fat wallet, left him standing in the street with nothing but the clothes on his back and a humiliation so profound it had burned away whatever softness was left in him. Now, she saved fallen girls. The thought was so ugly it almost made him laugh. He spent the first day watching. He saw her, Josephine, stepping out of a fine carriage, dressed in dark, expensive silk, her hair pinned up, her face serene and righteous. She looked untouched by time, by the harshness of the land that wore other folks down to bone and gristle. She was exactly as he remembered, and his hatred for her felt as fresh and sharp as a new knife. His plan began to form, a cruel, simple thing. He would find a way to smear that perfect reputation. He would remind her what filth felt like. It was on the second day, near sundown, that he saw the other one. Past the saloons and the livery, down by the creek where the laundresses beat clothes against the flat rocks, there was a collection of shacks. They were little more than driftwood and sod, leaning against the wind. And moving between the wash house and the worst of these shacks was a woman. She was pale, so pale the fading light seemed to pass right through her. She was thin, her dress a shapeless collection of mended rags that hung on a frame too small for it. Her hair was a dull brown, pulled back in a knot that looked like it hadn't been undone in a week. She moved with her head down, carrying a heavy basket of wet linens. Her shoulders stooped. She looked like a ghost, a creature already half gone from the world. He watched her until she disappeared into the shack, closing a door that hung crooked on one hinge. He went to the nearest saloon, not the bright one on the main street, but a dim, smoky dugout smelling of stale beer and desperation. He bought a whiskey and listened. He didn't have to wait long. Men talked. They talked about the railroad, the price of beef, and the righteousness of the widow Beecham. Eli nursed his drink. Beecham, he said, his voice quiet. To the barkeep. Heard she runs a home up on the hill. The barkeep, a man with a stained apron, nodded. That she does. A saint, that one. Taking in girls who got themselves in trouble. Family help her? Eli asked, swirling the amber liquid. No family to speak of. Banker Beecham died of a bad heart 3 years back. Left her everything. No brothers, sisters. The barkeep paused, wiping a glass. Well, there is the sister, but no one speaks of her. Not polite. Eli slid another coin across the bar. I ain't polite. The man leaned closer, his voice dropping. That's Cora, the younger one. Lives down by the wash. Been there a year, maybe 2. She was sent away years ago when she was just a girl, 14, maybe 15. Some terrible disgrace. Josephine brought her back, they say, but she don't acknowledge her. Keeps her out of sight. Cora just washes. Stays to herself. Damaged goods. Eli felt a cold, sharp thrill. Josephine's sister. Hidden away like a bad secret, a weapon. delivered right to his hand. He finished his whiskey, the burn in his throat matching the fire in his belly. His plan just got better. He would not just shame Josephine. He would use her own blood to do it. He bought a pouch of tobacco and left. The landscape around Cora's shack was a study in neglect. The red dirt was packed hard, littered with broken bottles and ash. The wind whined, ceaseless, carrying the alkaline smell of the creek water and the lye soap. She lived on the edge of everything, in a place no one looked at. He found her trying to split a thick log of piñón pine. She was using a dull axe, her movements clumsy and weak. Each swing barely bit the wood, and the effort sent tremors through her thin arms. She was breathing hard, her face pinched and white. Eli stepped out of the dusk. "That's a stubborn piece of wood." She froze. She didn't scream or start, just went utterly still. The axe held halfway up, her head turned slow, her eyes wide and blank, like a spooked deer's. "You'll wear yourself out before you get a fire lit," he said, his voice deliberately soft. He'd used that voice before, to calm horses, to fool men. She said nothing. She just stared, her knuckles white on the axe handle. He walked closer, stopping a good 6 feet away. He held his hands up, open. "Let me." She didn't move, didn't lower the axe. "I'm not gonna hurt you," he said. He took another step and gently took the axe from her grasp. Her hands were stiff, and he had to uncurl her fingers. They were ice cold, despite the work. He turned to the log, set his feet, and split it in 2 clean strikes. The sound was sharp and final in the quiet evening. He then broke the halves down into smaller, manageable pieces. "You live here alone?" he asked, stacking the wood near her door. She gave a tiny, jerky nod. Her eyes were fixed on the ground. "Cold nights. Still. Need a good fire." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the pouch of tobacco and a packet of rolling papers. "You smoke?" She shook her head, a barely perceptible movement. "Well, maybe you'll want it later." He set the pouch on the stack of wood. "My name's Eli." She whispered something. It was so quiet, the wind stole it. "What's that?" "Cora," she said, louder this time, but her voice was rusty, like she didn't use it much. "Cora," he nodded, as if committing it to memory. He looked at her, really looked at her. She was younger than he first thought, maybe 23, 24, but she had the eyes of an old woman, vacant and haunted. "You ought to eat something more than wind." She flinched, as if he'd accused her of something. "I'll be back," he said. "Maybe bring some jerky." He turned and walked away, not looking back. He felt her eyes on him, a cold spot between his shoulder blades. Until he was gone, he felt no pity, only a grim satisfaction. She was perfect, broken, scared, and forgotten. Josephine's sister. He made it a routine. He came by every evening. He brought firewood. He brought a rabbit he'd shot, already skinned and cleaned. He sat on an overturned bucket while she cooked it over her small, smoky stove. And he talked. He talked about nothing important. He told her about the high desert in Mexico, about horses, about a time he saw a mountain lion frozen in a snowdrift. He filled the silence that seemed to swallow her whole. She never said much. She would nod or shake her head. She ate the food he brought like a starving animal, quick and desperate, but she never asked for it. She was cautious, always. She sat on her cot, as far from him as the tiny shack would allow, her hands clasped tight in her lap. Eli watched her, and the game began to curdle in his mouth. He was here to build a connection, to wind himself around her so he could parade her in front of the town, in front of Josephine. He wanted to show the righteous widow what her discarded sister was capable of, and who she was capable of being with. A half-breed gunslinger with a bad reputation. The scandal would be delicious. But this woman, Cora, she didn't play by the rules of the game. He'd expected coyness or desperation, or even a sullen anger he could break through. He had not expected this profound, empty stillness. He noticed how she flinched. If he stood up too fast, her shoulders would leap to her ears. If he handed her a piece of wood, her fingers would snatch it. Avoiding his skin as if he were hot coals, he tested it once, letting his knuckles brush hers as he passed her a tin cup of water. She jerked her hand back so violently she spilled half the water, then stared at the wet patch on the floor, trembling, her lips moving in a silent apology. He felt a dark, unfamiliar stirring. It wasn't kindness, it was irritation. His plan required her to be a person, a woman he could seduce. This thing in front of him was just a bundle of old terrors. One evening, he brought a bottle of whiskey, thinking it might loosen her tongue. He poured a little into her cup. She looked at it, then at him. "I don't," she whispered. "It'll warm you," he urged. "No." Her voice was firm. It was the first time she had refused him outright. He drank his own, watching her. "Someone teach you to be scared of everything, Cora?" Her head snapped up. The emptiness in her eyes was gone, replaced by a sudden, sharp fear that was so raw it startled him. She stood up, her hands twisting in the fabric of her skirt. "You should go," she said. "I ain't done nothing," he said, annoyed. "Please, just go." He stood, towering over her in the small space. He wanted to grab her, to shake her, to demand she act like a woman he could use. Instead, he just looked at her, and in the low light from the stove, he saw them, faint, dark bruises circling her left wrist, old but still visible against her pale skin. They looked like the marks of fingers. A coldness settled in his chest. He'd seen marks like that before, on women in brothels, on men who'd been tied up. "Who did that to you?" he asked, his voice rougher than he intended. She hid her hand in the folds of her skirt. "It's nothing. It's old." "Who?" She shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "Please." Eli slammed his cup down. He left the shack, the whiskey, and the rest of the wood, and strode out into the night, his mind churning. The bruises didn't fit. The fear was too deep. This was more than just a girl sent away for getting caught with a boy in a hayloft. He stopped by her shack late the next night, not intending to go in. He just watched. The wind was high, throwing shadows against the thin walls, through a crack in the wood. He could see inside. The fire was dead. The room dark save for a sliver of moonlight. Cora was on her cot, but she wasn't lying down. She was sitting bolt upright, her back pressed flat against the wall, her knees drawn up to her chest. She was wrapped in a threadbare blanket, and she was fast asleep. He stared for a long time, sleeping sitting up, like a soldier on watch, like someone terrified of what might happen the moment they lay down. He felt a powerful urge to ride out, to leave this town and this woman and his half-baked plan for revenge. This was not what he had signed up for. This was a darkness he didn't want to touch. But the thought of Josephine, serene and righteous in her fine brick house, held him fast. He would see this through. He would just have to be more careful. The weather turned. The sky, which had been a clear, hard blue for weeks, turned a sickly gray. The wind picked up, howling down from the high peaks. And then the rain came. It wasn't a gentle spring shower. It was a deluge, a solid wall of cold water that turned the dry arroyos into churning rivers and the hard-packed streets into mud pits. Eli sat in his rented cabin, dry, a fire blazing. He thought of Cora. Her shack was built on low ground, right by the creek, the same creek that was now a brown, roaring monster. He swore, pulled on his coat, and headed out into the storm. The water was already knee-deep when he reached her. The creek had breached its banks and was swallowing the flat land. He could hear the water rushing, feel the ground trembling with it. He shoved open her crooked door. The inside was a wreck. Water swirled around the legs of the stove. Her cot was soaked. She was standing on her small, rickety table, holding a small cloth bundle to her chest. She wasn't crying or screaming. She was just watching the water rise, her face completely, terrifyingly blank. "Cora!" he yelled over the roar of the storm. She looked at him, but he wasn't sure she saw him. "We have to go, now." She didn't move. He lost his patience. He waded through the frigid water, junk bumping against his legs. He reached her and didn't waste time with words. He bent, put one arm under her knees and the other around her back, and lifted her. She let out a single, sharp gasp, like a small animal hit. Her whole body went rigid, but she didn't fight him. She just clung to her bundle, her face pressed against his wet coat. She weighed almost nothing. He could feel every one of her ribs. He carried her out of the shack and into the driving rain. The water was waist-deep now, the current trying to pull his feet out from under him. He cursed, his muscles straining, and pushed through it, up the slope toward the main part of town, toward his cabin. She trembled against him, a constant, violent shaking that had nothing to do with the cold. He kicked his door open and deposited her inside, slamming it shut against the wind. The small room was warm from the fire. He lit the lamp, its yellow light falling on her. She was soaked to the skin, her thin dress clinging to her, her hair plastered to her skull. She was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. "Get those clothes off," he ordered. Turning his back to her, he threw a dry blanket onto the chair. "All of them. You'll die of cold." He heard fumbling, shaking movements behind him. Then, a small, choked sound. He looked over his shoulder. She had taken off her dress and was standing in a thin, ragged shift that was just as wet. She was trying to unfasten the blanket he'd given her, but her fingers were too numb and shaking. "Here!" He strode over, snatched the blanket, and wrapped it around her, pulling it tight. He found an old shirt of his in his saddlebag and tossed it to her. "Put that on, under the blanket. I'll make coffee." He busied himself at the stove, his back to her, listening to her quiet, miserable sounds. When he turned around, she was huddled by the fire, wrapped in the blanket, his shirt hanging off her small frame. She had not stopped shaking. "Drink this." He handed her a hot tin cup of coffee, black and bitter. She took it with both hands, but they shook so much he had to steady them. "The bed," he said. "Get in it. Get under the covers." "No," she whispered, her eyes on the fire. "I'm fine here." "You ain't fine. You're half frozen. Get in the bed, Cora. I'm not gonna argue with you." She looked at the bed, then at him, her fear palpable. "I'll take the floor," he said, his voice rough with an emotion he didn't want to name. "Just get warm." Slowly, like an old woman. She stood and crawled into his bed, pulling the quilts up to her chin. He watched her, even under the heavy blankets. She shivered. He sat by the fire, cleaning his gun, sharpening his knife, doing anything to keep his hands busy. The storm raged. An hour passed. He could still hear her shivering. He sighed, the sound loud in the small room. He stood up and blew out the lamp, plunging the cabin into darkness, lit only by the red glow of the fire. He walked to the bed. He could hear her breath catch, a small, terrified hitch. He lay down on top of the quilts, his boots still on, his gun belt still at his hip. He lay on his back, staring at the ceiling, a good foot of space between them. "You're shaking the whole damn bed," he muttered to the darkness. "I'm too tired to sleep on the floor." He felt her go still, as if she was trying to stop shaking by force of will. He turned onto his side, his back to her. "Just for warmth, nothing else. Go to sleep." A long time passed. The storm howled. He could feel the small measure of heat coming from her body, even through the quilts. He was wide awake, his muscles tight, his mind a battlefield. This was not seduction. This was not revenge. This was something else, something messy and cold and broken. He stared into the dark, listening to the rain and the wind. Sometime, deep in the night, when the storm had quieted to a steady drum, he heard her. She whispered in her sleep, It wasn't his name. It wasn't even a word. It was just a sound, a low, pleading no. He clenched his jaw, squeezing his eyes shut. He didn't sleep at all. The sun cut through the single dirty window of Eli's cabin, striking Cora where she lay on the cot. She was already awake, her eyes open and fixed on the rough log ceiling. She had not moved all night, had not, as far as he could tell, slept at all. The storm had passed, leaving behind a cold, scrubbed-clean morning sky and the sound of dripping water. Eli was on his feet by the fire, his back to her, nursing a cup of black coffee. The air in the small room was thick with their shared presence, with the smell of wet wool, old fear, and the coffee he'd boiled. He had slept on the floor, his head on his saddle, and every bone in his body ached. "I have to go back," Cora said. Her voice was a dry rasp. He didn't turn. "There's nothing to go back to. The creek took it." "It's my place." She pushed herself off the cot, the quilts pooling at her feet. She was still wearing his shirt and the damp, patched skirt she'd put back on. She looked like a child playing dress-up in a man's clothes. "Your place is mud," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. He was tired, and this woman was making his plan, his simple, clean line of revenge, a complicated mess. "I have to see." She moved to the door, her bare feet silent on the floorboards. He sighed, turning to face her. The old anger at Josephine flared up, hot and familiar. This was Josephine's doing. This wreck of a woman was his enemy's sister. He should be enjoying this. He should be sharpening the knife. Instead, he just felt tired. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a few coins. 3 silver dollars. "Here, go to the mercantile. Get a new dress, some shoes. Find a room at the hotel till you sort yourself." He held the money out to her. It was a simple gesture, a transaction. He was buying her time, buying her off, trying to set his plan back on its rails. Cora looked at the coins in his hand. Her face, which had been pale and blank, suddenly crumpled. A dark, painful flush rose up her neck. Her eyes filled with tears, hot and immediate. "No," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Just take it," he said, impatient. "It's just money." "No." She shook her head, backing away from him, her hands coming up as if to ward him off. "I won't be bought." The words hit him like a fist to the gut. Won't be bought. He, who had been bought and sold by Josephine for the price of a banker's status. He, who was planning to use this woman to buy her compliance with kind gestures and firewood, all to settle a score. "I ain't buying you," he growled, but the words felt false. "Yes, you are," she said, and the tears spilled over, running down her face. "That's what men do. They give you things, and then they take—" She grabbed the door latch and fled. She ran out into the bright, cold morning, her bare feet slipping in the fresh mud. Eli stood there, his hands still outstretched, the silver dollars heavy and suddenly dirty in his palm. He swore, a low, vicious sound, and threw the coins onto the table. He grabbed his hat and coat and went after her. He found her where her shack used to be. It was, as he'd predicted, a ruin. The creek had risen, punched through the flimsy walls, and then retreated, leaving behind a thick, stinking layer of black mud and debris. Her cot was overturned. Her small stove was half buried. Everything she owned was gone, soaked or broken. She was standing in the middle of it, her arms wrapped around herself, shaking. She wasn't crying anymore. She was just staring at the destruction, her face vacant again. Eli walked past her, his boots sinking deep into the mud. He grabbed the frame of the cot and, with a grunt, heaved it out of the muck. He righted the stove. He picked up a log that had served as a chair. He didn't speak. He just worked. He grabbed a shovel he'd seen leaning against the nearby wash house and began to scrape the thickest of the mud out of the shack. It was heavy, mindless work. It was something to do with his hands, with the coiled-up anger and the unfamiliar sting of guilt. Cora watched him for a long time. The sun rose higher, warming the air, raising a damp steam from the wet earth. Finally, she moved. She bent and picked up a single, mud-caked tin cup. She took it to the creek, which was now just a fast-running, clear stream, and she began to wash it. They worked all day. He tore out the ruined wall planks. She salvaged what little was left, a spoon, a blanket so ragged it was barely cloth, a small wooden box. She scrubbed them clean, her hands raw, and set them in the sun. They didn't talk. The silence was broken only by the scrape of his shovel, the sound of him splitting new wood, the rush of the water. The town watched. He felt the eyes. Mrs. Albright, the pastor's wife, walked by. Her skirts held high out of the mud. She saw him, the half-Mexican gunslinger, stripped to his undershirt, his skin sweating and smeared with dirt, rebuilding the outcast's hovel. She saw Cora, her face streaked with grime, her hair falling from its knot. Mrs. Albright turned and walked away, her back stiff with judgment. Later, at the saloon, he heard the whispers. He was buying whiskey, his muscles aching, his hands blistered. "Seen Navarro down by the creek," one man said, his voice low. "Playing carpenter for the Beecham Ghost. Wonder what he wants with that one," another replied, with a wet, knowing laugh. "Ain't nothing there worth taking. Maybe he's practicing charity, like the high and mighty sister." Eli took his bottle and walked out. The whispers followed him. Just as he'd intended. He had wanted the town to talk. He had wanted the scandal to start, to build, to reach Josephine's ears. It did. He heard 2 days later that Josephine Beecham had been informed of her sister's new protector. She had, according to the gossip, merely nodded, her face serene. She said nothing. She did nothing. That cold, calculated silence was more of a provocation than any public condemnation. It was her way of saying that both he and Cora were beneath her notice. Insects squirming in the mud. The old fury returned, burning away the guilt. He would make her notice. He went back to the shack. The walls were rebuilt, patched with fresh-cut pine. The smell of sawdust and mud filled the small space. Cora was inside, kneeling, trying to nail a loose floorboard. She was clumsy with the hammer, striking her fingers more than the nail. He took the hammer from her, his hand brushing hers. She flinched, as she always did, but she didn't pull away completely. "You'll lose a finger," he said, and drove the nail home in 2 sharp strokes. He sat back on his heels. The light inside the shack was dim. She sat opposite him, her hands clasped in her lap. "You should leave this town," he said. She shook her head. "Where would I go? I got no money, no one." "There's always places to go." "This is all I know." He looked at her, at the quiet desperation. He needed her to trust him. His plan depended on it. He needed her to talk. "I know what it is to have no one," he said, his voice quiet. He picked up a wood shaving, turning it over in his fingers. "I came from the border, south of here. My father was Mexican. My mother was white. Neither side wanted me. You learn to live in the cracks." She watched him, her eyes guarded. "I spent 5 years in the high desert," he went on, telling her stories, filling the small, dark room. "It's not like this. It's empty. So empty you can hear your own heartbeat. The sky is so big it feels like it's going to crush you. But it's clean." He told her about a gunfight in a cantina over a game of cards, about the man he'd worked for who'd cheated him, who'd left him for dead over a misunderstanding about a horse. He spoke of betrayal, not his own by Josephine, but the common, everyday betrayals of men. He painted a world that was hard and unjust, a world he knew she would understand. He talked for days, while they worked, while they shared a plate of beans he'd cooked, while the sun set and painted the red rocks in shades of blood and fire. And slowly she began to talk. It came out in pieces, small and broken, like an old, shattered plate. "Josephine, she was always the pretty one," she whispered one evening, staring into the flame of the small fire he'd built. "The one Father loved. I was just in the way." He waited. "When Father died," she said, her voice dropping so low he had to lean in, "it was just us. Josephine was older. She said I was a burden. She said I had bad blood in me." Another day. While she was mending his shirt, her stitches were tiny and perfect. The one piece of grace she seemed to possess, she spoke again. "She sent me away when I was 14. She said a man in the next county, a friend of our father's, would take me in, give me work." Eli stopped cleaning his revolver. He looked at her bent head, the needle moving in and out, in and out. "He was not a friend," she said, her voice flat, all emotion scrubbed from it. "He was a man who liked young girls. Josephine knew. She must have known. She wanted me gone." Eli felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. This was darker than he'd thought. "I stayed there a year, and when he was done with me, he sold me." The needle stopped. "Sold you?" She nodded, a small, jerky movement. "To a house, in Tucson, a place for railroad men, for miners. I was there for 6 years. Eli looked at his gun, at the clean, simple metal. He thought of Josephine, in her fine brick house, saving fallen girls. The hypocrisy was so vast, so vile, it choked him. "How'd you get out?" he asked. "I got sick, too sick to work. They threw me out. I walked. I don't remember a lot of it. I just ended up here. Josephine found me. She said I'd shame the family name. She said I could stay, if I stayed here, by the wash, and never spoke to anyone, if I never told anyone who I was." She set the shirt down, her hands trembling. He stood up, his boots scraping the floor. He felt a sudden, suffocating need for air, for space. He walked to the door and looked out. The sun was setting. Behind him, he heard her take a shaky breath. You're kind to me," she whispered to his back. "You bring me food. You fixed my wall. No one has ever done that." She stood up and took a hesitant step toward him. "I have never," she said, her voice cracking, "known any tenderness that didn't have a cost. I don't know what you want from me." The question hung in the air, raw and exposed. She was offering to pay. For the firewood, for the food, for the repaired walls. She was offering the only thing she'd ever been told she was worth. The shame of it, hers and his own, flooded the room. He turned, and the look on her face, the fear, the resignation, the awful, waiting emptiness, broke something in him. She saw the look on his face, the anger, the confusion, and she misunderstood it. She flinched, as if he'd raised a hand to her. She turned and walked out of the shack, her shoulders hunched, and went down to the creek, her back to him, her shame a physical thing. Eli stood in the doorway, his hands clenched into fists. His plan, his beautiful, simple revenge, felt like swallowing glass. He left her alone for 2 days. He drank. He sat in his cabin and stared at the walls. He thought about riding out, about leaving her in this whole rotten town behind, but he couldn't. The image of her face, waiting to be told the price, wouldn't leave him, and the thought of Josephine, walking free and clean, was still a burr under his skin. On the 3rd morning, he went to the livery, saddled his horse, and then rented a quiet old mule. He rode to her shack. She was outside, hanging up linens she had washed, her movements slow and mechanical. "Get on," he said, gesturing to the mule. She looked at him, her eyes wide and fearful. "Where?" "Just get on. I'm not gonna bite." She hesitated. Then, with a weary sigh, she gathered her skirts and pulled herself onto the mule's back. He led them out of town, away from the railroad. Away from the creek, he took the high trail, the one that led up into the scrub-covered mesas. The air grew thinner, cleaner. The wind was high and steady. They rode for an hour, in silence. The world opened up, a vast expanse of red rock, blue sky, and distant, purple mountains. He stopped them on a high ridge. "Look," he said. Down in the valley below, a shadow was moving. It was a herd of wild horses, maybe 50 strong, running for the sheer joy of it. They moved as one, a fluid, powerful thing, their manes and tails streaming in the wind. They were all colors: pinto, dun, black, and roan. They were free. He looked at Cora. She was sitting straight up on the mule, her hands gripping the pommel. Her eyes were fixed on the horses. A small, strange sound came from her throat. She was laughing. It wasn't a pretty sound. It was rusty, like a dry hinge, a bark of pure, startled air. It was the first time he had ever heard her make a sound that wasn't born of fear or sorrow. The sound died as quickly as it came, and she pressed her hand to her mouth, as if shocked at herself. But her eyes were still on the horses. They were shining. He watched her, and the last, hard piece of his revenge plan crumbled to dust. He had brought her here to soften her, to make her trust him more, to make the final betrayal more cutting. But seeing her face, that one brief, broken flash of joy, he knew he was the one who was trapped. He was tangled up in something he didn't understand and didn't want. He was conflicted, and he hated it. That night, the wind came back, a low, mournful howl that rattled the door of his cabin. He was sitting at his table, cleaning his gun again, the bottle of whiskey half empty. He was thinking about leaving, for good this time. There was a knock. It was so soft. He thought at first it was the wind. He opened the door. Cora was standing there, wrapped in her thin blanket. Her hair was down, hanging in lank strands around her face. She looked like a ghost, illuminated by the pale moonlight. "I don't want to be alone," she whispered. Her voice was shaking. "The wind. It sounds like men yelling." He stared at her. He should have sent her away. He should have told her to go back to her own place, to be strong. He should have. He stepped aside and let her in. She stood by the door, clutching the blanket, as he closed it, shutting out the sound of the wind. The cabin was small, and suddenly, unbearably close. The fire was low, casting shadows that danced on the walls. He could smell the lye soap on her skin, the dust in her hair. "Cora," he started, but he didn't know what to say. She took a step toward him. "Please," she said, her voice so low it was barely a breath. Don't make me be alone. Not tonight." She looked at him, her eyes desperate, not with desire, but with a bone-deep terror of the dark. And he, who had been alone his whole life, who had nursed his hatred like a companion, understood. He didn't move. She came to him. She stood in front of him, trembling, and then, with a fumbling, awkward movement, she put her hands on his chest and rose on her toes. She kissed him. It was a desperate, clumsy kiss. Her lips were cold. It was like a drowning person grabbing for a log. And it lit a fire in him. All the pent-up anger, the loneliness, the raw, frustrated desire came roaring to the surface. He kissed her back. His arms went around her, pulling her hard against him, lifting her off her feet. The blanket fell away. His mouth was bruising, hungry. This was not tenderness. It was a collision. He tasted her fear, and it only fueled his own desperate need. He backed her against the wall, his hand tangling in her hair, pulling her head back. He was shaking, his blood pounding in his ears. His hand slid down her side, over her hip, and grabbed her thigh, pulling her leg up, pressing her against him. She shattered. It wasn't a scream. It was a choked, strangled sound, a noise of pure, animal terror. Her whole body went rigid. She began to fight him, her hands beating against his chest, her head twisting, her breath coming in sharp, terrified gasps. He let her go instantly, as if he'd been burned. He stumbled back. Cora slid down the wall, curling into a tight ball on the floor, her hands covering her head. She was sobbing, dry, racking sobs that shook her entire body. "I'm sorry," she gasped, the words torn out of her. I'm sorry, I can't, I'm broken down there. Please, I'm sorry." Eli stood over her, his own breath ragged, his body shaking with a desire so violent it sickened him. The sight of her, cowering on the floor, apologizing for her own terror, was like a bucket of ice water to his soul. The heat vanished, leaving only a cold, profound shame. "Don't," he said, his voice a harsh croak. "Don't be sorry." He ran a hand over his face. He felt like a monster. "I'm the one," he said. "I'm the one who should be sorry." He turned away, walking to the fire, gripping the rough mantle until his knuckles turned white. He fought for control. He fought for breath. After a long time, her sobs quieted into small, hitched breaths. He didn't turn around. "The bed," he said to the fire. "Go on, get in it. I'll stay here." "No," she whispered from the floor. "I'll go." "You ain't going anywhere in the dark." He finally turned. She was still on the floor, huddled by the wall. "Get in the bed. Cora, I won't touch you. I swear." She watched him, her eyes wide and dark in the dim light. Slowly, painfully, she uncurled and crawled onto the cot, pulling the blankets up to her chin. She lay on her side, facing the wall, her back to him. He sat in the chair by the fire, but the cold was in him now. He couldn't get warm. He could feel her shaking, a small, constant vibration from across the room. He stood, took his own blanket, and walked to the bed. She flinched as his weight settled on the mattress. He lay on his back, on top of the covers, his hat on his chest, staring at the ceiling. He was fully dressed, his gun still at his hip. They lay there in the dark, the wind howling outside, a chasm of silence between them. He heard a small, choked sound. She was crying again, silently, her shoulders shaking. He rolled onto his side, facing her back. He hesitated, his hand hovering in the air. Then, gently, he put his arm over her, his hand resting on her shoulder. He didn't pull her close. He just held her, an anchor. She went still for a moment, and then she let out a long, shuddering breath. The tears came, a quiet, terrible flood. She wept for all the years, for the man who'd bought her, for the men who'd used her, for the sister who'd sold her. And Eli Navarro, the gunslinger, the man bent on revenge, just lay there in the dark, fully clothed, holding her as she cried. He did not move. He did not speak. He just held her and listened to the sound of a woman breaking and wondered, for the first time in 8 years, what in the hell he was doing. The morning after they had lain in the dark, the air in the cabin was heavy and fragile. Cora left before the sun was fully up, slipping out while he was by the fire, his back to her. She took nothing. She said nothing. But the space she left behind felt colder. Eli let her go. He spent the morning in town, his face a hard mask, buying cartridges and coffee. He felt the eyes on him, the whispers that had solidified into open stares. He had been seen carrying her from the flood. He had been seen rebuilding her shack, and he had been seen entering his cabin with her in the dark. The scandal he had wanted was blooming. He was on his way back, cutting across the muddy main street, when Pastor Albright stepped into his path. The man was tall and thin, his black coat brushed clean, his face a picture of strained piety. "Mr. Navarro," the pastor said, his voice quiet but firm, meant only for Eli. Eli stopped. He did not greet the man. He waited. "I have been asked to speak with you," the pastor continued, clasping his hands. On behalf of a concerned party, on behalf of Mrs. Josephine Beecham. Eli felt the name like a spur in his gut, his old, cold fury, which had been confused and dampened by Cora's presence, returned with a sharp, clean heat. Mrs. Beecham, the pastor said, lowering his voice, is a pillar of this community. She runs a home for unfortunate women. She is deeply concerned about your interference with her sister. Interference, Eli repeated. The word was flat and ugly. Your intentions, whatever they may be, are causing talk. You are dragging the poor woman's name through the mud, a name Mrs. Beecham has worked very hard to protect. Protect, Eli said. The pastor's thin patience began to crack. The girl is simple. She is damaged. Mrs. Beecham wishes you to cease this association. It is unseemly, and it can only bring more shame upon a soul already burdened by it. Eli looked at the pastor. He saw the man's weak, watery eyes, the certainty of his righteousness. He saw the starched white collar, and behind him, he saw Josephine, her hand moving the man like a puppet. She was trying to sweep him away, just as she had swept Cora away. You tell Mrs. Beecham, Eli said, his voice low and guttural, that I will associate with whomever I please, and you tell her to keep her charity. I know what it's worth. He stepped around the man, his boots sinking into the mud, and left the pastor standing there, his mouth open, his message delivered and ignored. The fury was back. It felt good. It felt clean. He would not be pushed aside, not this time, and he would not let her hide her shame. He would rub her face in it. He found Cora at the shack, sitting on the rebuilt step, stitching a patch onto a pair of men's trousers, work she must have taken from the wash house. She did not look up when he approached. She looked smaller than ever, as if she were trying to fold into herself and disappear. He sat on the ground near her, leaning against the new wall. They sat in silence for a long time, the only sound the steady pull of her needle through the thick canvas. He warned me off you, Eli said finally. Cora's hands paused. Who? The pastor, sent by your sister. She bent her head lower, her hair falling to hide her face. You should listen to him. I bring trouble. I'm not good. She's the one who ain't good. Cora. You don't know, she whispered. You don't know what I am. I know what she did, he said, his voice hard. She sent you to that man. She sold you. Her hands began to tremble. She set the trousers aside. She says she saved me. When I came back, she gave me this place. She lets me work. She lets you hide, Eli said, bitter, so no one has to look at what she made. Cora drew her knees up, wrapping her arms around them. The sun was setting, and the air was growing cold. I tried. In that place, I tried to be clean, she said, her voice so quiet he had to strain to hear it. But there is no clean, there's just getting through. I wasn't Cora there. I wouldn't let them use my name. I was Lucy, or May, or whatever they wanted. I'd go away, in my head. I'd pretend it wasn't my body. I'd just float up by the ceiling and wait for it to be over. Eli watched the red light fade from the cliffs. His hands felt empty. He wanted his gun. He wanted to ride to Josephine's fine brick house and put a bullet through her polished front door. That's how I survived. Cora whispered. I pretended not to care. I pretended it didn't hurt. I pretended I was made of wood. If you don't care, they can't break the part that's you. She broke you before you ever got there, he said. Cora shook her head. A violent, sudden movement. No, not all of me, but they wanted to make sure, so everyone knew. She looked at him, her eyes dark and hollow in the dusk. They wanted to make sure we knew we weren't human, that we were just livestock. She fumbled with the ties on her ragged skirt, her fingers clumsy. She pushed the fabric down, just below her hip, exposing a palm-sized patch of pale skin. "Don't," he said, his voice a raw croak. "He didn't want to see." But she did it anyway. She laid her skin bare. Near the bone of her hip was a small, ugly scar. It was a brand, a letter B, surrounded by a crude circle, puckered and old. The mark of the house, the mark of ownership. Eli stared at it. He felt the blood drain from his face, replaced by a white-hot, killing rage. It was one thing to hear it, it was another to see it, to see the proof that they had burned her, marked her like a stray cow. He stood up, his body tight as a coiled rope, and walked away. He paced the small clearing in front of her shack, his fists clenching and unclenching. He wanted to tear the town apart, starting with Josephine. Cora quickly covered herself, pulling her skirt back up, her breath hitching, as if she expected him to be disgusted, to leave. He stopped pacing and turned to face her. She looked terrified, exposed. He had to say something. He had to meet this horror. He owed her that. "I know what it is," he said, his voice rough. "To be treated like you're nothing, like you're filth to be wiped off a boot." She looked up, confused. He walked back and sat near her again, but not too close. He stared out at the dark line of the mesas. "I loved someone once," he said, the words tasting like rust. "A long time ago, right here, in this town. I was nothing, a half-breed kid working for scraps. I had nothing to offer her, but, well, it didn't matter. I thought it was enough." He picked up a small stone, his thumb rubbing its smooth surface. "She was everything. She was fine and clean, and she said she loved me. But I was inconvenient. My skin was too dark. My wallet was too empty. When a rich man came along, a banker, she discarded me." He snapped his fingers. A single, sharp sound in the quiet. Like that, didn't even look back. He threw the stone. It skipped once and vanished into the shadows. "I vowed then," he said, his voice flat. "I would never be used again. I would never be weak enough for someone to throw me away. I'd be the one with the power. I'd be the one who did the hurting." He looked at her. "They put their brand on you," he said, his voice thick. "She put hers on me, just deeper, where no one can see it." He didn't tell her it was Josephine. He didn't have to. He just let his own wound lie bare next to hers. Cora stared at him, her eyes wide, tears slowly gathering. She saw him. He wasn't just the kind stranger or the dangerous gunslinger. He was like her. He was broken, too. She moved, slowly, crawling the small distance between them. She sat beside him, her shoulder almost touching his arm. She didn't say anything. She just shared the silence. That night, the cold came down from the mountains, sharp and biting. The fire in her small stove was not enough. They sat wrapped in their separate blankets, the small room feeling like a tomb. Eli looked at her. She was shivering, her face blue in the dim light. He thought of the night in his cabin, of her terror. He thought of the brand on her hip. He stood and held out his hand. She looked at it, confused. "Come here," he said, his voice gentle. "It's too cold." She hesitated, her fear warring with the cold and the new, fragile thread of understanding that now connected them. She put her hand in his. Her fingers were like ice. He led her to the narrow cot. He lay down first, on his back, fully clothed. He let go of her hand and held the blanket open. She paused for a long moment, then lay down beside him, stiff as a board, her back to him. He draped the blanket over them both. The cot was so narrow, they were pressed together. He could feel her shivering, feel the sharp bones of her spine. They lay in silence. The fire crackled. The wind moaned outside. He did not touch her. He just lay there, his own body rigid, offering his warmth. After what felt like an hour, her shivering began to slow. She let out a long, shuddering sigh. And then, slowly, she turned over. She was facing him, in the faint, dying glow from the stove. He could just make out her face, her eyes wide and dark. She was terrified, but she was not running. He raised his hand, his movement slow, deliberate. He touched her face, his rough fingertips tracing the line of her jaw. She flinched, but did not pull away. A single tear escaped her eye and ran cold onto his thumb. He leaned in. He did not kiss her. He just rested his forehead against hers. He breathed in. She smelled of soap and wood smoke and fear. "You ain't made of wood, Cora," he whispered. He felt her take a single, ragged breath. He kissed her. It was slow. It was awkward. It was nothing like the desperate, hungry collision in his cabin. His lips were dry, questioning. He gave her every chance to turn away. She didn't. She made a small, broken sound in her throat and kissed him back. It was a strange, tearful, silent thing. He was gentle, so gentle he was shaking with the effort of it. His hands moved over her clothes, learning the shape of her shoulders, her waist, the sharp angle of her hip. He avoided the place where the brand was. He could feel the terror in her, a high, thin wire of panic, but underneath it, there was a desperate, starved need. This time, when his hand brushed her thigh, she did not bolt. She just stiffened, her breath catching. He stopped. He held still, his hand resting on her, not moving, not demanding. He waited. He waited until he felt the tremor pass. He waited until she let out a small breath. He waited. It was the waiting, that undid her. When it finally happened, it was slow, and it was full of held breath. It was full of silent tears that wet both their faces. He was careful, so careful. But her intensity, her desperate need to feel something that was not pain, overwhelmed them both. It was a raw, aching, fundamental claiming. It was not about pleasure. It was about survival. Afterward, they lay tangled in the thin blankets. The silence of the room absolute. Cora's body was limp, her face buried in his shoulder. He could feel her crying, not with the dry, racking sobs of before, but with a quiet, steady weeping. He just held her, his heart pounding a slow, heavy beat against his ribs. He felt undone. She stirred, lifting her head. He could barely see her in the dark. She whispered, her voice a raw, broken thing. No one ever waited for me before." She laid her head back down, and, for the first time since he had met her, she fell into a deep, exhausted sleep. Days passed. Something shifted. Eli's revenge plan. The burning, righteous anger that had driven him back to this town was gone. It had evaporated, burned away by the sight of a brand on a woman's hip, by the sound of her whisper in the dark. All that was left was Cora. He still brought her food, but now they cooked it together. He watched her hands as she kneaded dough for biscuits. He sawed wood, and she stacked it. He would find her watching him, a small, hesitant look in her eyes, as if she were seeing something she did not understand. He did not sleep in his own cabin again. He slept on the floor by her cot, or sometimes, when the cold was bad. They lay together, back to back, just for the warmth. The town watched. The whispers grew louder. He was her man. They said, the gunslinger and the whore. He didn't care. He wanted only one thing now, to get her away. "We should leave," he said one afternoon. They were sitting by the creek, the water running clean and bright over the rocks. She looked up from the shirt she was washing. "Leave? There's nothing for you here, nothing for me. We could go south, New Mexico, or Arizona territory. Get a piece of land. No one knows us there." He was offering her a new life, a clean start. Cora looked down at her hands, red and chapped from the lye water. The hopeful, hesitant light that had begun to kindle in her eyes died. "I can't," she said. Why not? There's nothing holding you. I got money. We can buy horses. You don't know what I am, she whispered, her shame returning like a heavy cloak. I'm ruined. Eli, I'm dirty. You see me? You see something? But it ain't real. I'm not a woman you build a life with. Cora, that's... No. She stood up, her voice gaining a sharp, painful edge. You're a good man. You're kind to me, and you'll get tired of me. You'll see what I really am, and you'll leave. Everyone leaves. I ain't everyone. I can't, she said, her voice breaking. I have no right to be loved. I have no right to be happy. I have to stay here. I have to face the town. I have to pay for what I am. He stood, frustrated and angry. Pay for what? For what she did to you? For all of it, she cried, and grabbing the wet laundry, she fled back to the shack, leaving him standing by the water. He let her go. He knew this shame was too deep for him to argue away. It was in her bones. He was returning from the mercantile 2 days later, a bag of flour on his shoulder, when he heard the voice, a voice he hadn't heard in 8 years, a voice that still haunted his sleep, clear, cold, and righteous. He stopped, hidden by the corner of the wash house. He could see them. Josephine Beecham was standing in front of Cora's shack. She was dressed in dark green silk, her hair perfect, her face a mask of cold disappointment. She was looking at Cora, who was standing in the doorway, hunched and small. I am profoundly disappointed. Cora, Josephine said, her voice carrying on the clear air. I gave you a chance. I gave you shelter. I protected you. Cora said nothing. She just stared at the ground. And this is how you repay me, by fornicating with that half-breed gunslinger? In public, for the whole town to see, you are dragging my name, our father's name, into the filth where you live. I didn't, Cora whispered. He's just kind. Kind? Josephine let out a small, sharp laugh. Men like that are not kind, you foolish girl. They are animals. They use damaged things. You were supposed to be quiet. You were supposed to be repentant. I saved you. Cora, I pulled you from the gutter when you came back, diseased and dying. I gave you a place to hide your shame, and you throw it all back in my face. For him. Eli's blood went cold. He heard the footsteps. He felt Cora's shame, thick and suffocating. He heard Josephine's lie. I saved you. He dropped the bag of flour. It hit the dirt with a soft thud. He stepped out from behind the wash house. You saved her? He said. Josephine froze. Her head snapped toward him. Her eyes widened. For a second, just a second, she did not recognize him. Then, recognition dawned. Her serene mask cracked. She saw the man he was now, the scars, the gun, the coldness in his eyes. Eli, she breathed. His name was a ghost on her lips. It's been 8 years. Josephine, he said, walking toward them. He stopped a few feet away. Cora was staring at him, then at Josephine, her face a mask of confusion. You know him? Cora whispered to her sister. You talk about saving, Eli said, his voice deadly quiet, his eyes locked on Josephine. You talk about shame. You have no right, Josephine said, regaining her composure, her voice trembling with rage. This is a private family matter. It stopped being private when you sold her. Eli spat. And it stopped being private when you threw me away. Cora's head whipped toward him. What? Ask her, Eli said, pointing at Josephine. Ask your sister who I am. Ask her who the half-breed kid was that she used to meet in the hayloft. Ask her who she swore she loved, right before she left him for a banker with soft hands. The color drained from Josephine's face. She looked, for the first time, like a cornered animal. He's lying, she hissed at Cora. He's filth. He's trying to ruin me. You were already ruined, Eli said. You discarded me when I had nothing. You discarded her because she was in your way. We're the same, Cora, me and you. We're the trash she sweeps under the rug." Cora was shaking her head, her eyes wide with a dawning, terrible understanding. She looked at Eli, at the cold fury in his face, a fury she now realized wasn't just for her, but for him. She saw the 8 years of bitterness. She saw the calculated way he had approached her, the firewood, the stories, the horses, the gentleness. The pieces all clicked into place. He had come here for Josephine. He had found her. Her face crumpled. The last fragile bit of hope in her died, leaving a cold, empty void. She looked at him, her voice a dead, broken whisper. "Was I just for her? Was I just your revenge?" Eli's breath hitched. He looked at her, at the absolute devastation on her face. He wanted to lie. He wanted to say no, to grab her, to tell her it had changed, that she was everything. But the truth was there, hanging between them. It had started that way. His plan had been to use her. He hesitated. It was just a second, just one tick of a clock, but it was too long. His silence was the answer. Cora let out a sound, a small, terrible sound of a soul breaking in two. She turned, stumbled into her shack, and slammed the crooked door, leaving him alone in the sudden, awful quiet with the woman who had ruined them both. The sound of the bar sliding into place on the other side of the door was as final as a gunshot. Eli stood in the dirt, his blood pounding, staring at the rough-cut planks. Behind him, Josephine Beecham let out a shaky breath, her face pale, her mask of serenity shattered. You animal!" she hissed, her voice trembling with a rage that matched his own. You've ruined her! You've ruined everything!" Eli did not look at her. His focus was on the door. "Get out," he said, his voice a low, lethal growl. "I will not be—" "I said, get out!" He turned, his eyes so cold and full of murder that she took an involuntary step back. "This is between me and her. You're done." "You'll hang for this," she spat, gathering the shreds of her dignity. "You've corrupted her. You've dragged her, and me, into your filth. The sheriff will hear of this." "Go on, then," Eli said. "Go tell him. Tell him all of it." She stared at him, her chest heaving, defeated. She turned, her silk skirts rustling, and stalked away, leaving him alone in the awful, sudden quiet. He turned back to the door. "Cora," he said, his voice rough. He pressed his hand flat against the wood. "Cora, open the door." Silence. "She's gone. Open the door. Let me talk to you." He heard a small, shuffling sound, then nothing. It didn't stay that way," he said, pressing his forehead to the door. "Cora, please, it changed. I didn't know it was changing, but it did. What I said to her, that was the past. It ain't now." He waited. The only sound was the rush of the creek and the high, thin wind. He banged his fist on the door. A single, heavy strike. "Damn it, Cora, talk to me!" Nothing. No light came from the cracks. No sound of movement. He stayed there for hours. The sun went down, plunging the wash into a cold, purple darkness. He sat on the step, his back to her door, his body rigid. He sat there until the moon was high and the cold had seeped into his bones. He was a fool. He had waited 8 years to destroy Josephine, and in 1 second of hesitation, he had destroyed the only thing that had felt real in all that time. Finally, deep in the night, he stood. His legs were stiff. He couldn't stay here. He would give her the night. He would come back at dawn. She couldn't run. She had nowhere to go. He walked back to his cabin, the silence of the town pressing in on him. He did not sleep. He sat in his chair, his revolver in his hand, and watched the darkness. his mind replaying her face. The dawning, terrible understanding. The word revenge. At the first gray hint of dawn, he was moving. He didn't bother with coffee. He walked fast, his boots crunching in the cold dirt. He reached the shack. The air was still. "Cora," he called. No answer. He pushed the door. It swung open, scraping the floor. The bar was gone. The room was empty. A cold, sick dread punched him in the stomach. Cora. The cot was bare. The ragged blanket he had covered her with was gone. His own shirt, the one he had given her after the flood, was folded in a neat, small square on the bare mattress. She was gone. He ran outside, his heart hammering against his ribs. He looked at the mud by the creek, but the ground was hard, churned by his own boots from the day before. No clear tracks. His first thought was Josephine. Had she come in the night, sent men? He started toward the main street, but stopped. No, Josephine wouldn't get her hands dirty. She wouldn't take Cora. She would just let her disappear. His second thought was darker. The creek was running high. The cliffs were tall. I have no right to be loved. No, he whispered. He was a tracker. He could find her. He began to circle the shack, moving outward, his eyes scanning the ground. He found it. A small footprint, almost invisible, in a patch of damp earth near the high bank. It was heading away from town, toward the river, toward the high, rocky canyons that cut deep into the mesa. He didn't waste another second. He ran to his cabin, grabbed his rifle, his canteen, and his hat. He didn't bother with his horse. The horse couldn't go where he was thinking. He began to run, following the dry wash that led up into the canyons. He searched all day. The sun climbed, beating down on the red rock, turning the canyon floor into a furnace. He called her name until his throat was raw. Cora! His only answer was the echo, throwing his own desperate voice back at him. The fear was a living thing in his gut. He pushed himself, climbing rock falls, sliding down scree slopes. He was terrified of what he would find. He pictured her, a small, broken thing at the bottom of a ravine, her body as discarded as her life had been. His hesitation, his 1 second of silence had done this. He had finally, truly, become the man Josephine had always accused him of being. He scrambled up a sheer rock face, his fingers raw, and hauled himself onto a ledge. He was following the faintest trail, a few scuff marks, a single, broken branch of creosote. She had come this way. She was trying to get lost. Late afternoon, the heat was a physical weight. He was exhausted, his canteen half empty. He was in a narrow, branching canyon, a place of shadows and sheer walls. He stopped, listening. He heard nothing, just the buzz of insects. He was about to turn back, to try another branch, when he saw it. Not her, just a flicker of movement, a piece of dark-colored cloth, snagged on a thorn bush. Her blanket. He scrambled toward it, his heart in his throat. Below the bush was a washout, a crevice carved under a massive overhang of sandstone, hidden from the main trail. He slid down the loose gravel, landing hard. She was there. She was huddled in the back of the shallow cave, wrapped in the blanket, her knees drawn up to her chest. She was covered in dirt. Her dress was torn at the hem. Her arms and the side of her face were scraped raw and bloody from her climb. She was just staring. Her eyes were fixed on the opposite canyon wall, but they were not seeing it. They were dead. He was so relieved he couldn't speak. He just stood there, breathing in great, ragged gasps. "Cora," he finally said. She turned her head, her movement slow, like a sleepwalker. She looked at him. Through him, there was no fear, no anger, just a vast, hollow emptiness. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered. Her voice was a dry, cracked rasp. He slid down the wall of the crevice until he was sitting across from her. The space was barely big enough for both of them. He uncorked his canteen. Drink. She looked at the water, but didn't move. Drink, he commanded, his voice rough. Her hand trembled as she took it. She drank, long and deep, the water spilling down her chin. She handed it back. I thought you'd... He couldn't say it. Harmed yourself. Jump? She asked, her voice flat. She looked down at her scraped, bloody hands. I thought about it. I stood on the edge, up there, for about an hour. It looked quiet. Eli squeezed his eyes shut. I was going to, she continued, her voice devoid of all emotion. Or just walk until I couldn't, until the sun took me. It didn't matter. I just wanted to be gone, so you could both forget me. Cora, he started, his voice thick. But I stopped. She looked up, and he saw a single tear trace a path through the dust on her cheek. I remembered you in the cabin, that night, after I broke. You were so angry, but you waited, you just waited. You covered me with the blanket. You didn't touch me, and I thought... Her voice broke, a small, choked sob. I thought, even if it was a lie, even if it was all just a game to hurt her, you touched me like I mattered. You looked at me like I was a person. Her words were a knife in his gut. They were worse than any accusation. It wasn't a lie, he said, his voice desperate. He moved closer, crawling on his knees. Cora, listen to me. It started because of her. Yes, I won't lie to you again. I came back here to ruin her. I saw you, and you were perfect. The perfect tool. She flinched, the words striking her like a slap. Upon, she whispered, and the deadness in her eyes finally hardened into a low, trembling anger. You used me. You saw the brand. You heard what she did, and you used it. You used me to get back at her. No, he shouted, grabbing her shoulders. It changed, and I was too stupid to see it. I don't know when you ran from my cabin, when you showed me the brand, when you laughed, Cora, that day, by the canyon, when you laughed at the horses, it all changed. He was begging her, his grip bruising. I never planned to feel this. I never planned to love you. Love? She spat the word, her face contorting. You don't love me. You pity me. And you hate her. That's not love. That's just more of the same. You used my body to hurt her. You're no better than the men who... You're no better than any of them. Her accusation struck him silent. He reared back as if she had hit him. He was no better. He had used her wounds, her trauma, as a weapon. That ain't true, he whispered, but the words were weak. It is, she screamed, her voice breaking, the tears finally coming, hot and furious. You let me believe. You were gentle. You waited. And all of it was just to make the betrayal sharper, to make her shame better. You're a liar, Eli, a cruel, cold liar. Her words hung in the hot, oppressive air of the crevice. They were both breathing hard, stripped bare, the truth a raw, open wound between them. The heat, the betrayal, the pain, the raw, undeniable need. It all crested. He looked at her, at the tears streaming down her face, at the fury in her eyes, and he stopped thinking. He didn't have words. He only had this. He lunged. He grabbed her, his mouth crushing hers. It was not gentle. It was not kind. It was a desperate, angry kiss that tasted of dust and salt and grief. It was a kiss that said, You're wrong. You're wrong. I need this. She fought him. For a second, she was a wildcat, her small fists beating against his chest, her head twisting. No, no! But her no was a lie, just as his gentleness had been a lie. This fury. This was the truth. This was what they both were. Broken, angry, and starving. Her fists unclenched. She grabbed the front of his shirt, her fingers digging into his muscles, and she pulled him down, kissing him back with the same desperate, furious energy. They fell, a tangle of limbs, onto the sandy, dusty floor of the crevice. They collapsed onto the sharp, dry grass. It was a wordless battle. He tore at her skirt. She clawed at the buttons of his shirt. This was not lovemaking. It was an exorcism. It was two people trying to claw their way inside each other, to burn away the pain. The ground was hard. It hurt. Her nails raked his back, and he welcomed the sting. His grip on her hips was bruising, lifting her, pressing her into the dust. It was messy. It was fast. It was a raw, primal collision of pain and pleasure, a desperate affirmation that they were alive. When it was over, they lay tangled, gasping, pressed into the dirt. Their bodies were slick with sweat, smeared with dust and grime. The silence was absolute, broken only by the harsh sound of their breathing. Eli pushed himself up on one elbow, his body aching. He looked down at her. Her hair was a wild, dark tangle, full of leaves and dirt. Her lips were swollen. Her eyes were squeezed shut. She opened them. She looked up at him, her gaze clear and raw. "I used to dream," she whispered, her voice rough. "In that place, in Tucson, when the men were—" She swallowed, her gaze holding his. "I dreamed someone would want me. Like this, not like a chore, not like a piece of meat, but like they were starving, like they couldn't breathe without it." Her voice broke. "I always knew it would be a lie, but I dreamed of it." His throat tightened. He felt something break inside him. He reached out, his hand shaking, and gently brushed the dirt-caked hair from her face. "It was never a lie. Cora," he said, his voice thick. "Not this, not you. The plan was a lie. My hate, that was a lie. This is the only true thing." He leaned down and kissed her. It was not furious. It was not gentle. It was just a promise. A long, slow kiss that sealed the shattered pieces. He helped her to her feet. They were a wreck. He gave her the last of the water, then pulled her onto his back to carry her from the crevice. "We're going back," he said. "Eli, I can't, not after they'll look at me." "Yes, you can," he said, settling her on the mule he'd retrieved. "You're not hiding anymore, and I'm not running. We're going back. Together." They rode into Prescott in the middle of the next day. They were a sight, both covered in dust, their clothes torn, their faces scratched. Cora rode the mule, sitting as straight as she could. Eli rode beside her, his hand never far from his gun. The town stopped. People stared. The whispers were loud, like dry leaves skittering down the street. Eli ignored them. He didn't take her to the shack. He took her to his cabin, kicked the door shut, and barred it. He spent an hour gently washing the cuts on her arms and face with whiskey and a clean rag. He gave her his bed. He sat in the chair, cleaning his rifle, guarding her while she fell into a dead, exhausted sleep. The next morning, they were out of food. They had to go out. "Stay here," he said. "No," she said, her voice quiet. She was wearing his other shirt, the sleeves rolled up. I'm not hiding." They walked to the mercantile together. He kept his hand on the small of her back. He felt her trembling, but she kept her head high, her eyes fixed forward. They were coming out of the store, Eli carrying a sack of flour and coffee. When they saw them, 3 men lounging on the porch of the saloon, spitting tobacco into the dust, miners. They were rough, loud. One of them, a big man with a greasy beard, saw Cora. His eyes widened, and then a slow, ugly grin spread across his face. Well, he said, stepping off the porch to block their path. "If it ain't Lucy. Heard you was back in town. You're keeping better company now, I see." Cora went rigid, a small, terrified sound escaping her. She tried to step behind Eli. Eli set the sack down, his body going still. "Get out of the way," he said, his voice quiet. "Or what, greaser?" A second man snickered, stepping up beside his friend. "You gonna pay us? 'Cause she still owes me $2 from Tucson. Always was a broken-down piece of—" Eli didn't wait for the end of the sentence. He moved. It was a blur. He hit the big man in the throat with his elbow. As the man gasped, choking, Eli drew his revolver, not to shoot, but to pistol whip him. The heavy barrel connected with the man's temple with a sickening crack. The man dropped like a stone. The other two jumped him. It was a brawl, exploding into the dusty street. Eli was fast, brutal. He was a scrapper, used to unfair fights. But there were two of them, and one pulled a knife. "Eli!" Cora screamed, frozen on the boardwalk. The third man, who had been watching, grabbed an empty beer bottle from the railing. He drew his arm back. "Get back, you whore!" he yelled, and he threw it, not at Eli, but at her. Cora ducked, but not fast enough. The bottle shattered on the wooden post beside her, and a shard of green glass flew, slicing deep into her forearm. She cried out, a sharp sound of pain, clutching her arm as blood welled up, bright red, staining the sleeve of his shirt. The sight of her blood, of her pain, sent a cold, clean rage through Eli. The man with the knife lunged. Eli caught his wrist, twisted it with a vicious snap. The man howled as the bone broke.
"That's enough! Stop this! Sheriff!"
It was Josephine's voice. She was standing on the boardwalk 50 feet away, the pastor and Sheriff Brody at her side. Her face was a mask of righteous horror. "Sheriff," she commanded, her voice ringing out. "Arrest this man. He is a violent degenerate. He attacked these men in broad daylight. He has corrupted my sister. Look at her. He's dragged her into his violence." Sheriff Brody, a tired man with a thick mustache, drew his revolver. "All right, Navarro, that's enough. Stand down. Drop the gun." Eli was breathing hard, his knuckles split and bloody. He looked at the men on the ground. He looked at Cora, clutching her bleeding arm, tears of pain and fear on her face. He looked at Josephine, triumphant. The whole town was watching. "They started it," Eli growled. "They called her—" "He's a liar," Josephine cut in, marching forward. "He has preyed on a sick, unfortunate woman. He's been using her, holding her against her will. She is not in her right mind." "No." The word was quiet, but it cut through the street. Everyone stopped. Cora stepped off the boardwalk, her bloody arm held tight. She was trembling from head to foot, but her eyes were blazing. "No," she said again, her voice shaking but gaining strength. "He's not holding me." "Cora, dear," Josephine said, her voice dripping with false pity. "You're not well. You're hurt. Let the sheriff handle this brute." "Don't you call me dear!" Cora shouted. The sudden, raw power in her voice shocked the crowd into silence. She took a step toward her sister, her finger pointing, her own blood dripping into the dust. You did this!" "Cora, this is not the place," Josephine hissed, her face going pale. "This is the only place!" Cora cried, her voice breaking with years of forced silence. "You talk about shame? You sent me away when I was 14 years old. You sent me to Abner Potts. You knew what he was." A collective gasp went through the crowd. The pastor's wife covered her mouth. "That is a terrible, insane lie," Josephine stammered. "Is it?" Cora turned to the crowd, her eyes wild. "He used me for a year, and then he sold me. He sold me to a brothel in Tucson because you wanted me gone, because I was in your way." She was sobbing now, but she didn't stop. "I was there for 6 years. 6, while she was here, being a fine, charitable lady, saving fallen girls. She never saved me. She sold me. And when I came back, sick, dying, she hid me. She hid me in that shack and told me to be quiet, told me to never speak my name, so I wouldn't shame her. She pointed at the man Eli had hit, who was groaning. These men, they knew me there. They knew Lucy. That's what you do, sister. You make Lucy's and May's so you can be Mrs. Beecham. A dead, profound silence fell over the street. No one moved. The sheriff slowly lowered his gun, his eyes fixed on Josephine. The townsfolk, the good people of Prescott, looked from the bleeding, weeping woman in the street to the pale, trembling pillar of their community. They looked away. They shuffled their feet. They began to murmur. Josephine's mask was gone, shattered. She had no words. Cora stood in the middle of it all, bleeding, shaking, but finally, terribly, free. The explosion of truth left a crater in the middle of Prescott's main street. Sheriff Brody, a man who preferred his town quiet, looked at the weeping, bleeding Cora. He looked at the pale, shaking Josephine, whose social currency was evaporating in the noon sun. He looked at Eli, bloody-knuckled and defiant, and at the groaning, conscious men from Tucson. He sighed, holstering his revolver. "Ma'am," he said to a woman on the boardwalk, "help me get Miss Cora to the docks. Her arm needs stitching." To Eli, he said, "You stay put. Navarro, this ain't over." To his deputy, he motioned at the men on the ground. "Get these two in a cell, drunk and disorderly." The crowd began to break apart, not in a rush, but in small, quiet groups, murmuring. Their eyes averted from Josephine. They had witnessed a public execution of a reputation. Josephine Beecham, the town saint, was left standing alone, her righteous anger having curdled into a mask of pure, ugly humiliation. She turned, her back rigid, and walked to her carriage. No one moved to help her. The silence of the townsfolk was her verdict. Josephine was disgraced. She kept her fine brick house, and she kept her dead husband's money. But she was ruined. She denied Cora's story, of course. She told the pastor her sister was insane, poisoned by that violent half-breed. But the town had seen Cora's face. They had heard the ring of truth. And more importantly, the two men Eli had beaten, the ones from Tucson, were run out of town by the sheriff the next day. Their hurried departure confirmed everything. Enough other men, men with wives and businesses, had passed through that same brothel in Tucson. They knew the brand. They knew the name Lucy. They said nothing, but their silence shamed Josephine more than any accusation. The ladies of the church auxiliary stopped calling. The Beecham Home for Wayward Women became a hollow monument to a lie. Eli helped Cora move from the shack by the wash that very afternoon. He did not ask. He just did it. After Dr. Miller had stitched her arm, Eli settled her in his own rented cabin, then went back. He burned the shack to the ground. He stood and watched the thin, leaning walls and the ghosts of her past turn to ash, the smoke rising clean into the hard blue sky. He found a small cabin for rent about 3 miles north of town, tucked into a stand of old pines, with a small creek running behind it. It was solid, built of good timber, with a real stone fireplace and 2 rooms. It was a home. He paid 3 months' rent in advance. They lived quietly, but the quiet was not always peaceful. The demons that had been kept at bay by Cora's sheer will to survive now had space to move in the silence. She had nightmares. She would wake up, not with a scream, but with a choked, silent terror, her eyes wide, lashing out at the shadows. At him. She would sit by the fire for hours, staring into the flames, her face locked in a misery so deep he was afraid to touch her. "It's still in me," she whispered to him one night, her hands scrubbing at her skin in the wash basin. "I can't get it off. I feel dirty. Everyone in town, the way they looked, they know. They see what I am." "They see a woman who told the truth," Eli said, his voice rough as he took the cloth from her and dried her hands, his touch clumsy but gentle. "They see a whore," she said, her voice flat. and they see you. I've pulled you down with me. You'll be ashamed of me." This self-loathing was a poison, and he didn't know how to draw it out. He struggled with his own ghosts, the violence that had exploded from him in the street, the ease with which he had broken that man's wrist. It sickened him. He looked at his own hands, scarred and calloused, and saw only destruction. He had lived by the gun for so long. He didn't know how to be the man she needed. How could these hands, which had taken lives, ever build a peaceful one? One morning, while Cora was asleep, he took his heavy Colt revolver and his Winchester rifle. He wrapped them in a thick, oiled cloth. He pried up a loose hearthstone by the fire, dug a shallow hole in the cold dirt beneath, and buried them. He placed the stone back, sweeping the dust clean. He kept only a small, 5-shot pistol, which he tucked into a boot, out of sight. He needed work. He needed to be a different kind of man. He walked into town, past the saloons, to the livery stable. He found the owner, a man named Silas, and asked for a job. Silas looked him up and down, at the hard set of his shoulders, the scar on his jaw, the reputation that now clung to him. "You any good with horses?" Silas asked, spitting tobacco. "Some," Eli said. "I need a stable hand, not a gunslinger. It's mucking stalls. It's breaking green colts. It's hard pay for harder work. $5 a week and feed." "I'll take it," Eli said. He began to build a life, one moment at a time. He would leave before dawn, the sky a pale gray, and return after dusk, his body aching, his clothes smelling of hay and horse sweat and honest dirt. He would come into the cabin, and Cora would have hot coffee waiting. She would tend to the new blisters on his hands. Their love grew in these quiet, ordinary moments. It grew in the silence. He'd come home to find she had spent the day making bread, her hands and face smudged with flour, and the sight of her, safe and warm in their kitchen, would make his chest ache. He taught her how to groom his horse, her movements hesitant at first, then firm, her voice soft as she spoke to the animal. They washed their clothes together in the cold. Clear Creek behind the cabin. They knelt side by side on the flat rocks, far from the judgment of the town. They would sit on their small porch in the evenings, watching the massive summer thunderstorms roll in from the south, the sky turning a violent, beautiful purple, the air electric. They rarely spoke of the future. They barely spoke of the past. They just were. But the passion that had first thrown them together in that dusty canyon, that raw, desperate fury, it was still there. It burned under the quiet. Their intimacy was not always the slow, healing tenderness he had shown her in the shack. Sometimes it was wild, needy. It was a hunger. It was a wordless, furious argument against the world, against their own histories. It was a desperate clinging, a dark and needy claiming of each other, as if they were trying to prove, again and again, that they were still alive. One night, a storm broke, not in the distance, but directly overhead. The rain came down in solid, deafening sheets. A crack of thunder exploded so close it shook the dishes on the shelf. The cabin was plunged into darkness as the wind blew out the lamp. Eli moved to light it, but he saw Cora standing by the window. She was just a silhouette against the brilliant, flashing sheet lightning. He expected her to be afraid, to be shaking. She always hated the sound of thunder. Another crack, louder this time, lit the room. She turned. Her hair was down. Her eyes were not wide with fear, but with a strange, fierce light. She was not afraid. "Eli," she said, her voice clear and steady over the roar of the rain. He stopped, the match in his hand. She walked toward him through the dark. She stopped when she was so close he could feel the heat from her skin. "I want," she started, her voice dropping, becoming thick. "I want to feel my body. I want to feel it as mine." He could barely breathe. "Not theirs," she whispered, her hand coming up to touch his chest. "Not a memory, not something broken or dirty. I want to feel it as mine, and yours." She reached up, her small, flour-dusted hands gripping his shirt, and she pulled him down. She kissed him. It was not the desperate, frantic kiss of the canyon. It was not the hesitant, tearful kiss of the shack. It was a claiming. It was a kiss of choice, of power. Their love-making that night was not about healing. It was about possession. It was intense, and it was slow. A deliberate, sensual exploration. In the dark, with the storm raging outside, Cora claimed herself. She claimed him. She was no one's victim. She was no one's ghost. She was his, and he was hers. And as the storm finally passed, leaving only the sound of the rain, they lay tangled, and for the first time, there were no nightmares. Their fragile peace lasted for 6 weeks. 6 weeks of hard work and quiet evenings. It was almost enough to make Eli believe they could have a real life. Then a stranger rode into town. He was a tall, thin man in a long, dark coat. Despite the summer heat, he rode a fine black horse. He had 2 guns, tied low, and his eyes were the color of a winter sky, cold and empty. He didn't stop at the hotel. He went to the saloon, ordered a whiskey, and laid a creased, yellowed piece of paper on the bar. The barkeep looked at it. It was a wanted poster. Old. From Texas. It offered a reward of $500 for a man named Eli Navarro, for the killing of a rancher's son in a bar fight 9 years ago. The barkeep, a man who had watched Eli work at the livery and mind his own business, shook his head. "Never heard of him," he said. The bounty hunter drank his whiskey, his eyes scanning the room. "He's here," he said, his voice flat. "I'll find him." The barkeep's young son, who had been cleaning glasses, slipped out the back door. He ran, fast as his legs could carry him, to the livery stable. Eli was brushing down a mare when the boy found him, gasping for breath. "Mr. Navarro," the boy panted. "There's a man, a bounty hunter, in the saloon. He's asking for you. He's got a poster. From Texas." Eli's blood went cold. He dropped the brush. The old life, the one he had buried, had just clawed its way back to the surface. He gave the boy a dime. "You're a good boy, Silas. Go home. Don't say you saw me." He didn't run. He walked, deliberately, out of the livery, cutting through the back alleys, his hand resting on the small pistol tucked in his boot. He had to get to Cora. He found her by the creek, hanging laundry. She saw his face, the hard, familiar mask that had been gone for weeks, and her hand stilled. "What is it?" she asked, the wet sheet slipping from her fingers. "You need to pack," he said, his voice quiet, urgent. "Just what you can carry. We have to go, now." "Go? Eli, what happened?" "A bounty hunter. He's in town. He's looking for me. An old charge from Texas a long time ago." The color drained from her face. This was it. The fear she had lived with. That he would leave. That their peace was too good to be real. "All right," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "I'll get the blankets. The food." She grabbed his arm, her eyes desperate. We'll go to New Mexico. Like you said, we can ride south. He won't ever find us in the mountains. We can run." She was ready to fly, to vanish, to do whatever it took to keep him, to keep this life. Eli looked at her panicked, determined face. He looked at the small, solid cabin behind her, the smoke rising from their chimney. He saw the laundry, a symbol of their simple, shared life, hanging on the line. He thought of her, standing in the street, facing down her sister, her whole life of shame. She had stopped running. He put his hands on her arms, holding her steady. "No," he said, his voice quiet, but full of a cold, hard finality. What do you mean? No," she whispered. "Eli, he'll He'll kill you, or he'll take you back, and they'll hang you. We have to run." "I've run my whole life," he said. He looked past her, at the town, at the life he had been trying to build. "I ran from what I was. I ran from what she did to me. I'm tired of running. Cora." He turned and walked into the cabin. She followed him, her heart pounding. He knelt by the hearth. He took his knife and pried up the heavy stone. He reached into the dark, cold dirt and pulled out the oilcloth-wrapped bundle. He unwrapped it, his heavy Colt, his rifle. He stood, the familiar, terrible weight of the revolver settling in his hand. Cora's hand flew to her mouth, a small, choked sob escaping her. He looked at her, his eyes dark, but not with the old anger. They were steady. "I won't run from you," he said. "This is our home. I'm not leaving it." Eli did not sleep. He sat in the chair by the hearth, his heavy coat resting on his thigh, the rifle leaning against the wall. He watched Cora as she slept, her breathing shallow, her face pale in the pre-dawn light. She had not argued. When she saw him take the guns from the earth, she had simply nodded, her jaw tight, and began to pack a small bag with flour, coffee, and dried meat. She was ready to run. But he was not. He was done running. He had run from his past, from his name, from Josephine's betrayal, from his own capacity for violence. He had spent 8 years running, and it had brought him nothing but an empty circle. Right back to this town, right back to this pain. He looked at Cora, asleep, her scarred arm draped over the quilt. She had spent her life running, too. They had both stopped here. This small, pine-walled cabin was the first home either of them had ever known. He would not be chased from it. When the sun was up, he stood. He checked the action on the Colt, loaded the 6th chamber. He put the rifle in the scabbard on his saddle. Cora was awake, watching him. "Eli," she whispered. "I'm going into town," he said. "Then I'm going with you." It was not a question. She stood, her face pale but her eyes fierce. She was the woman who had faced down her sister in the street. She was not the ghost from the wash house. "Cora, no, you stay here. You lock this door. If I ain't back by nightfall, you take the horse. You ride east. Don't stop." You told me you wouldn't run from me," she said, her voice shaking. "I'm not running from you either. I'm not hiding, not anymore. I'll be in town. I'll be waiting for you. At the Mercantile." He looked at her, at the unbreakable stubbornness in her eyes. It was the same fire he had seen the day he first saw her at the shack. He nodded, his throat tight. "All right, but you stay inside. You hear me? You stay where it's safe." He rode into town. It was just past 9 in the morning. The air was clear and cold. The town was quiet, but it was the quiet of a held breath. People saw him. They saw the rifle. They saw the Colt tied low on his hip, the way it had been when he first arrived. They saw the man he used to be. They scattered, ducking into shops, pulling children inside. He saw the horse, a fine black animal, tied outside the main saloon. He dismounted, tying his own horse 20 yards away. He walked onto the boardwalk. He didn't go into the saloon. He just stood in the middle of the street and waited. A minute later, the saloon doors swung open. The man who stepped out was tall and thin, wearing a long black coat. His eyes were the color of ice. He looked at Eli, his gaze flat, professional. He held a glass of whiskey in his hand. "Eli Navarro," the man said, his voice calm. "That's my name," Eli said. "I'm Gideon Shaw." He took a slow sip of his whiskey. "I got a warrant here from Texas, 9 years old, killing a boy named Calloway, $500. "It was a fair fight," Eli said, his voice just as calm. "He drew on me." "Don't matter to me," Shaw said. He set his glass down on the porch railing. "The warrant pays. You can come quiet, or you can come hard. I get paid either way. I'd rather you come quiet. It's a long ride back." "I'm not going back," Eli said. Shaw sighed. He looked at the sun. "I was afraid you'd say that. I heard you'd settled. Got yourself a woman. The broken one. Pity." Eli's hand didn't move, but his body went cold.
"You leave her out of this."
"Can't," Shaw said. "She's the one who told me where to find you." Eli blinked. "What?" "Not you. The other one. The fine lady. The sister. Mrs. Beecham. Paid me a visit last night, right after I got in. Said I'd find you here this morning. Said you were a violent animal and needed to be put down." Eli felt the last of his old, bitter hate for Josephine click into place. She had done this. She had brought the law, the past, his death, right to his door. "So," Shaw said, shrugging his shoulders inside the coat. "Quiet or hard?" "You'll get your answer," Eli said. Shaw smiled. It was a thin, cold thing. "All right, then." He reached for his glass, but it was a feint. His hand dropped, a blur, to the gun at his hip. He was fast. Eli was faster. Eli's Colt was out, bucking in his hand, the sound a flat, deafening crack that shattered the town's silence. Shaw staggered back, his own gun firing, the bullet kicking up dust 6 inches from Eli's boot. Eli's shot had taken him in the shoulder, spinning him. Shaw was a professional. He didn't go down. He grunted, caught his balance against the post, and brought his gun up again, his left hand steadying his right. He was aiming for Eli's chest. It was a clean, killing shot.
"Eli!"
The scream came from the boardwalk, from the door of the mercantile. Cora, she wasn't inside. She had been standing in the doorway, watching, her hand to her mouth. When Shaw raised his gun for the second shot, she didn't think. She just moved. She ran. She didn't run away. She ran to him. She threw herself into the space between them. Shaw fired. Eli fired at the same instant. The world exploded. Eli's bullet took Shaw in the throat, ending him. Shaw's bullet, meant for Eli, found Cora. It hit her in the side, a heavy, brutal impact that lifted her off her feet. She made a small, surprised sound, a gasp of air, and then she collapsed in the dust of the street, halfway between the two men. A terrible, profound silence fell. Shaw was dead, slumped against the railing. Eli's gun fell from his hand. He stared, unblinking, at the small, crumpled shape in the street. "No," he whispered. "No, no, Cora." He scrambled to her, his legs clumsy, falling to his knees in the dirt beside her. He turned her over. Her eyes were open, wide with shock. Her hand was pressed to her side, just below her ribs. Blood, dark and thick, was already soaking through her dress, pouring between her fingers. "Eli," she whispered, her voice a wet, confused sound. "It hurts." "No, no, no." He put his hands over hers, trying to stop the bleeding, but it was too much. His hands were instantly soaked, slick and hot with her blood. The metallic copper smell filled his nose. You weren't supposed to move," he choked out. "You were supposed to stay safe." You were, I saw," she coughed, and a small trickle of blood appeared at the corner of her mouth. The sight of it, that small red line, broke him. The man who had faced down death, who had buried his past, who had rebuilt his life, shattered. He leaned down, his face close to hers, the tears he hadn't known he possessed blurring his vision, dripping onto her pale cheeks. "Please," he whispered, his voice a raw, desperate prayer. "Please don't leave me. Cora, don't leave me. I never meant to love anyone. Not until you. I never meant to love anyone but you. Please." He scooped her up. She was so light. He staggered to his feet, her blood soaking the front of his shirt, and he ran. He ran past the silent, staring faces of the townspeople. He ran past the dead bounty hunter. He ran past Sheriff Brody, who was just arriving. He kicked open the door to Dr. Miller's office.
Help her!
He roared, his voice the sound of an animal in a trap.
Help her, or I'll kill you!
He laid her on the table. She was unconscious. Her hand fell away from the wound, and he saw the small, dark hole and the terrible amount of blood.
Get out,
the doctor said, grabbing towels.
Get out of my way, Eli, now!
Eli stumbled back, out of the room, into the small, clean-smelling waiting area. He leaned against the wall and slid to the floor. He looked at his hands. They were caked, drying, black-red in the low light. Her blood. He sat there. He didn't move. 1 hour. 2. Sheriff Brody came in. He sat in the chair opposite Eli. He looked at the blood. He looked at Eli's face, which was a mask of hollow, empty shock.
He's dead,
Brody said quietly.
Shaw.
Eli didn't respond. He just stared at his hands. Josephine Beecham. Brody continued. She's been arrested. Inciting, accessory, something. I don't know if it'll stick, but she's done in this town. Eli said nothing. Brody sighed. He pulled the creased Texas warrant from his pocket. He looked at it. 9 years ago. Calloway. I sent a wire. Seems Calloway drew first on an unarmed kid. You weren't even wearing a gun. You killed him with his own knife. It was self-defense. This warrant's just paper. His father was a rich man, that's all. He tore the paper in half, then in quarters, and dropped the pieces on the floor. You're a free man, Navarro. As far as the law's concerned, what you did to Shaw. He fired first. Everyone saw it. You're free? Eli slowly raised his head. His eyes were dead. What does it matter? He whispered. If she dies. The doctor came out. He was wiping his hands. He looked exhausted. Eli was on his feet in an instant. She's alive, the doctor said, cutting him off. She's alive, barely. The bullet went clean through, but it tore her up inside, broke a rib, hit her liver. I don't know. Eli, I've done all I can. She's strong, but I've never seen anyone lose that much blood and live. Can I see her? Just for a minute. She's not awake. Eli walked past him. She was lying on a small cot, covered in a white sheet, pale as the cloth. She was so still. He thought she was already gone, but then he saw the small, shallow rise and fall of her chest. He knelt by the bed. He took her hand. It was cold. He held it to his cheek, closed his eyes, and he prayed. He didn't know who he was praying to. He just prayed. She did not die. She held on through that night, and through the next day. Eli never left. He sat by her bed, holding her hand, watching her breathe. He washed her face. He spoke to her, his voice low, telling her about the cabin, about the horse, about the mountains in New Mexico. He just talked. On the 3rd day, her eyelids fluttered. She opened her eyes. They were unfocused, cloudy with laudanum. Eli, she whispered. His heart seized. I'm here, he said, his voice thick. I'm right here. Cora, I'm not going anywhere. You killed him, she said. He's gone, Eli said. He won't hurt you. No, she whispered. Not him. You killed the hate in you. I saw your face. After I fell. It wasn't anger. It was just pain. She closed her eyes and slept. Her recovery was slow. It took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of Eli sitting by her bed, of him carrying her when she needed to move, of him feeding her broth, 1 spoonful at a time. He saw her at her weakest. He saw the brand on her hip as he helped the doctor change her bandages. He saw every scar, every line of pain. And it was just her. It was just Cora. One afternoon, the sun was streaming in, warm on the bed. She was propped up on pillows. She had been quiet all morning, watching him as he sat, mending a tear in his own shirt, his stitches clumsy and large.
Eli,
She said, her voice stronger. He looked up. The doctor, he told me, yesterday.
told you what? About the damage inside.
She looked down at her hands, clasped on the blanket.
He said, with what the bullet did, I'll never be able to bear children.
Eli's hand stilled. He set the shirt down. He saw the old shame, the old fear of being broken, useless, returning to her eyes.
He said I'd be empty.
She whispered, a tear rolling down her cheek.
I can't be a proper wife. I can't give you a son. I'm still broken.
He moved, fast, sitting on the edge of the bed. He took her face in his hands, gently, forcing her to look at him. You listen to me, he said, his voice low and fierce. Are you broken? Yes, so am I. We're shattered. We're in pieces, but the pieces fit. But a son, a family.
A son?
He said, and he almost laughed.
Cora, I don't care about that. I don't care about a name. I don't care about a legacy. I don't want a proper wife. I want you.
He kissed her forehead.
I want your laugh. The one I heard that one time by the canyon.
He took her hands, kissed her palms.
I want these hands. The ones that know how to mend things.
He leaned his forehead against hers.
I want your voice in the dark.
When the nightmares come, I just want you, alive, breathing, beside me. Do you understand? You are all I want. The rest, it's just nothing. It's just dust. She looked at him, her eyes searching his. She saw the truth. She saw that he meant it. She saw, finally, that she was not a tool, not a body, not a vessel. She was just Cora, and that was enough. She let out a long, shuddering breath, the last of the poison, the last of the shame, leaving her body. And she wept. He held her. They left Prescott 2 weeks later. They left at dawn. Eli had bought 2 strong horses and a pack mule. He lifted her into the saddle. She was still weak, but she was steady. They didn't look back. They didn't see Josephine Beecham's fine house, its windows now dark, its owner gone, having left in the night for the east. They didn't see the whispers of the town. They just rode. They rode east, toward the high, clear air of the mountains. They rode for weeks, sleeping under the stars. They crossed into New Mexico territory. They found a high valley, nestled in the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, near Santa Fe. There was a river and a small, stone cabin, abandoned, its roof half gone.
No one knew their names.
They were just 2 people, building a home. Years passed. The cabin was solid now, the roof mended, a garden growing by the creek. They were older. The land had marked them. Eli's hair was threaded with gray, and the lines around his eyes were deep. Cora's face had filled out, and though the scar on her side still ached in the winter, the fear was gone from her eyes. They were peaceful. One night, a deep, cold winter night, a blizzard was howling outside. The fire in the hearth was blazing. They sat together, Eli reading a book, Cora mending a thick wool blanket. Eli's old Colt, the one he had used to kill Shaw, had been sitting on the mantel for years. It was a relic. He hadn't fired it since that day. Cora put down her sewing. She stood, walked to the mantel, and took the gun. It was heavy in her hands. She looked at it, at the smooth wooden grip, the cold, dark metal. It was a symbol of his past, of the blood, of the revenge that had brought him to her, of the bullet that had almost taken her from him. She turned to the fire. Eli watched her. "Let it burn," she said softly. She opened the iron door of the stove and laid the gun, his last gun, directly on the blazing logs. They sat and watched as the wood turned to coals around it. The metal began to glow, first a dull red, then a bright, angry orange. The wooden grip caught, flaring up, turning to white ash, until the gun itself was just a glowing, sagging, unrecognizable shape. Cora came back and sat, leaning her head against his shoulder. He kissed her forehead, his lips brushing her hair. "Let it all burn," he whispered, "except us." Thank you for listening to this story from Wild West. We would love to know where in the world you are listening from, so please drop a comment and let us know. We hope you enjoyed the journey of Eli and Cora. Please subscribe to From Wild West and share your thoughts about the story.